Hello. Good morning and welcome to the General Board of Church and Society. My name is Kendall McBroom. I serve as the Director of Civil and Human Rights here at the United Methodist Church General Board of Church and Society, and serve as a board member of NEARCAT, the National Religious Campaign Against Torture. We are grateful to have our many partners and friends here with us this morning as we seek to advocate and show support for the End Solitary Confinement Act. Today, the Senate is taking up for the first time in 10 years a hearing on solitary confinement. While we sincerely applaud and celebrate this decision, we must also acknowledge that it has been far too long. It has been too long for the family that has had to deal with the after effects of their loved one coming home and readjusting to life. It has been far too long for the child trying to understand their parent post experiencing the torture of solitary confinement. It has been far too long for the human being who has suffered under this heinous practice. The United Methodist Church has been a long-standing supporter of ending solitary confinement domestically and internationally. In fact, this building and our agency have been a place of organizing, mobilizing, and seminars focusing on making that desire a reality. For nearly 100 years, Church and Society has sought to live out its motto on a host of social concerns: living the faith, seeking justice, and pursuing peace. As an agency and a faith group, we are grateful to be included in this momentous occasion and are committed to doing our part to see this hearing move from questions to actions. As a general agency of the United Methodist Church, a denomination seeking to follow Jesus the Christ, we are compelled to stand in solidarity with our siblings today and throughout the world in calling for an end to solitary confinement. Not only is this in our book of resolutions, but this commitment comes from the very words and witness of the Christian Bible. It is our duty and aim to ensure the well-being and fair treatment of all persons, including those who find themselves within the carceral system. Today, I welcome you to this building and this press conference. I invite you to hear and be moved to action from the speakers of this day. And not only this, but it is my sincere hope that the words spoken today inspire you to contact your senators and let them know it is time to pass the End Solitary Confinement Act. Thank you so much.
Good morning. My name is Maria Morris, and I'm the director of the Stop Solitary campaign at the ACLU. I have litigated a lot of cases about solitary confinement around the country. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I've learned from those cases, particularly focusing on two systems that I know best, Arizona and Alabama. As a first point, it's really important to understand just how dangerous solitary confinement is. The most extreme harm is suicide. During one 15-month period in Alabama, 15 people died by suicide. That was a truly extraordinary number, about 3 times the national average rate of suicides. Of those 15 suicides, 13 were in solitary confinement. Because solitary confinement is so harmful and dangerous, the United Nations defines solitary confinement of 15 days or more as torture. But throughout our country, people are left in solitary confinement for months, years, sometimes even decades. When I started working in Arizona in mid-2020, the first incarcerated person I spoke to had been in solitary confinement since 2011. He was allowed to go to recreation only in a small concrete room with a wire mesh covering through which he could see a small portion of the sky. He had not seen any grass, not seen a tree, he'd not seen the horizon for 9 years. Numerous people in Alabama have spent years in solitary confinement without a single disciplinary charge against them. And while they're completing all of their requirements, they are participating in programming, they are keeping their cells clean, and they are respectful, and cooperative. And yet they cannot get out of solitary confinement. One of my clients in Alabama was sent to solitary confinement for 30 days as a punishment. But he stayed there 10 months, attempting to commit suicide 4 times, all because the prison couldn't figure out a different place to put him. In most prison systems, people who are mentally ill are placed in solitary confinement much more frequently than other people, and they are kept there much longer. Often people who are seriously mentally ill are kept in solitary confinement because of their illness. One of my clients, a young man who was seriously mentally ill and developmentally disabled, was placed in solitary confinement repeatedly for harming himself. He was in solitary confinement when ultimately he died by suicide. Another client is a man with schizophrenia. He was kept in solitary confinement for 7 years. He routinely heard voices telling him that his sister would be raped if he didn't harm himself. And so he would bang his head on his cell bars in order to keep his sister from being raped, as he understood the situation. He would then be pepper sprayed, taken out of his cell, washed off, and returned to his cell where he would continue to harm himself. This happened 50 times in 1 year, all while he was in solitary confinement. Eventually, with a lot of advocacy, he was moved to a mental health unit where he was able to interact with other human beings and get outside. And he stopped the cycle of self-harm. In the Federal Bureau of Prisons, as of today, more than 11,000 people are in solitary confinement. The majority of those kept in solitary confinement in the Bureau of Prisons for over a year are mentally ill. Nearly half the suicides in the Bureau of Prisons occur in solitary confinement, even though solitary makes up only about 8% of the population. And in immigration detention, where immigrants are held even though they have not been charged with any crime, ICE places people into solitary confinement. Thousands of people have been placed in ICE solitary confinement in recent years. And ICE keeps them there for a long time. There are 42 people in ICE detention who have been kept in solitary confinement for over a year. And sometimes ICE puts people in solitary confinement for really trivial reasons. One person was put in solitary for a month for using profanity. 2 people were placed in solitary for a month for what ICE described as a consensual kiss. In recent years, over half the people in ICE solitary confinement have mental illness. Solitary confinement is a dangerous, widespread practice in the Bureau of Prisons and in ICE detention, and it must be stopped. Now I turn over the podium to Eddie Ellis, a survivor and advocate.
Thank you. I want to say that I am a survivor of solitary confinement. I spent 10 years in solitary confinement, 6 years in ADX Supermax in Holmes, Colorado, in DOP. I just want to say that solitary confinement is very harmful. There's nothing helpful or good about solitary confinement. People are harming themselves in so many ways. I've been home now for 18 years and I still have residual effects of being in solitary confinement. And I just want to say we need to ban solitary confinement and stop weaponizing it and using it to harm the people that's being held with. And I just want to say that solitary confinement is a torturous practice that causes devastating physical and mental harms that lead to death and worsen the safety for everyone. Nearly half of all deaths by suicide in Federal Bureau of Prisons are happening in solitary confinement. So again, let's ban solitary confinement and more help them. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to my sister Natasha White, Director of Community Engagement, Interfaith Action. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and allies in the fight for justice, I stand before you today as a survivor, a witness to the horrors of solitary confinement within our federal detention centers. My story is not unique, but it is filled with pain, trauma, and a determination to see change. That's why I urge President Biden and Congress to enact the End Solitary Confinement Act, a crucial step towards ending this inhumane practice. Imagine spending years in a small, windowless cell with minimum human contact and little to no access to sunlight or fresh air. This was my reality for 4 long years, and the damage it inflicted on my mind and spirit is beyond words. I witnessed suicides, endured sexual abuse at the hands of correction officers who wielded power without accountability and felt the crushing weight of isolation every single day. My personal journey is intertwined with that of my ex-husband, who spent a staggering 12 years in solitary confinement within BOP facilities. He now languishes in the BOP Detention Center in Brooklyn, a stark reminder of the ongoing injustices within our system. We live in a nation that prides itself on research and statistical analysis, yet turns a blind eye to the overwhelming evidence of the devastating effects of solitary confinement. The truth is that solitary leaves individuals broken and irreparably emotionally disconnected and often filled with rage and despair. It pushes many to the brink of suicide as a desperate attempt to silence the constant torment within their minds. President Biden promised to end the torture inflicted upon incarcerated individuals. But where is that commitment now? When will we prioritize true rehabilitation and healing instead of perpetuating harm? The End Solitary Confinement Act is not just a piece of legislation. It is a beacon of hope for countless individuals trapped in a cycle of suffering. It calls for humane alternatives to isolation, emphasizing rehabilitation and mental health support, and demands accountability for those who inflict harm on vulnerable populations. As allies in this crucial fight, we must raise our voices, amplify our stories, and hold our leaders accountable. We must remind them of the human cost of solitary confinement and urge the need for change. Together, we can build a justice system that upholds human dignity, promotes healing, and works towards a brighter future for all. I realized last night when the lights went off in my house that I am affected more than I knew by solitary confinement because I slept in my car because there's lights. Being confined to a cell during the blackout in New York in 2002, we had no lights for days. I am scared of the dark. A lot of people consume the dark with suicide. That is the only way to get through. It is time to end this inhumane practice. It is time to treat people like people. Human rights belong to all humans. I don't know who goes next. Now I introduce to you the Unlock the Box director, Jessica Sandoval. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us here today. Again, my name is Jessica Sandoval, and I lead the Unlock the Box campaign, a national advocacy campaign to end solitary confinement in the U.S. Today, we gather to voice our unequivocal support for the End Solitary Confinement Act. This critical piece of legislation represents a monumental step forward in our ongoing fight to end solitary confinement in this country. Solitary confinement is not just a punitive tool. It's a practice that inflicts profound psychological pain and poses severe risks to mental health. Yet in our carceral systems, individuals, including vulnerable populations like people with mental health needs and youth, are placed in isolation for weeks, months, or even years. This is not only inhumane, but counterproductive to safety and rehabilitation. The End Solitary Confinement Act aims to end this barbaric practice in all federal facilities. By supporting this act, we advocate for a system that emphasizes rehabilitation over punishment, mental health over deprivation, and justice over neglect. The End Solitary Confinement Act, oh, I just said that. The evidence speaks for itself. Solitary confinement is torture. It causes immense suffering and devastating mental, physical, and emotional harm. Solitary causes people to engage in self-mutilation and suicide, as you heard. It causes heart disease, anxiety, depression, and psychosis. It leads people to deteriorate mentally and physically. Research shows us even 1 or 2 days in solitary leads to significant heightened risk of death by accident, suicide, violence, overdose, and other causes. A recent Journal of the American Medical Association research report on solitary confinement in North Carolina found that compared with individuals who were incarcerated and not placed in restrictive housing, individuals who spent any time in restrictive housing were 78% more likely to die in the first year after release, especially from suicide, 54% more likely to die by homicide, and they were also 127% more likely to die of an opioid overdose in the first 2 weeks after release. Indeed, solitary has directly caused the deaths of far too many people, and it has increased violence and harm in prisons, jails, and outside in our communities. The evidence also shows that, in fact, the opposite of solitary confinement, providing people full days out of cell with pro-social engagement and programming, increases safety. The RSVP program in San Francisco jails, for example, involves full days of out-of-cell congregate programming and saw violent incidents among participants in the program literally drop to zero in a 1-year period that was studied. In addition to financial savings, similarly, the CAPS program in New York used therapeutic rehabilitation, empowerment-based approaches without isolation and saw positive outcomes on safety and people's well-being. Approaches in other countries attempt to provide environments most similar to and conducive to people returning home to their outside communities show the most positive results. My colleague Maria mentioned the dire situation taking place in the Federal Bureau of Prisons. This alarming data clearly identifies solitary confinement as a major risk factor for mental health decline and self-harm, underscoring the urgent need for legislative action. Further compounding this issue, a February 2024 government accountability report showed the widespread and racially disproportionate infliction of solitary. BOP sent people to solitary over 70,000 times a year. Black people constituted 38% of the total BOP population, but 59% of the SMU placements. In the context of immigration detention, the situation also remains dire. Physicians for Human Rights and the Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinic reported that ICE oversaw more than 14,000 placements in solitary confinement between 2018 and 2023, with an average duration of 27 days. Hundreds of placements lasting over 90 days and some placements lasting over a year. Alarmingly, this likely undercount the actual extent due to inconsistent reporting practices. Particularly vulnerable populations, including transgender individuals and those with medical or mental health issues, face disproportionately harmful impacts. These reports paint a clear and disturbing picture. Solitary confinement is pervasive and widespread, under-monitored, and dangerously ineffective, leading to irreversible harm and loss of life. The End Solitary Confinement Act is not merely a legislative measure. It's a moral imperative to prevent further atrocities under our watch. We call upon legislators, community leaders, and all stakeholders to stand with us in support of the End Solitary Confinement Act. The Senate and House must pass it, and the President must sign it into law. The President must also immediately implement its provisions through executive action to fulfill his pledge to end solitary. We must dismantle these atrocious acts of government-sanctioned violence that betray our values of dignity and justice. It's time to change this punishment paradigm our systems uphold and our commitment to human rights. Thank you for coming out today. I hope you plan to attend the hearing, and we are available for comment at the conclusion of this press conference. Thank you.
questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing no questions, I will conclude said press conference. Thank you all for coming out.
Let's get some pictures.